Victoria, I am so glad to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come talk with me on Our True Colors. I've really been looking forward to this. As a matter of fact, I tracked you down. I was like, I hope she'll talk to me because what a topic. I can't even wait to get into it for listeners today.
Oh, thank you so much. Having this conversation with you is like I'm very grateful because it's the best reward for me, to be honest. It fills me with joy and satisfaction and happiness because you don't know what it takes, the loneliness that it takes, having people around you that don't believe in your work. You're trying to talk about concepts that they ignore and that they're not interested in. And finally, you have people who read what you wrote when you were on your own, sitting at a table, alone. And it's, I'm so grateful. That's the only thing I can say.
Well, to be honest, I'm grateful that you wrote these books. Let me kind of set the stage for listeners. I do know what it is to sit and write because I am writing my book right now. And this is after having done my, research for my dissertation and then continuing that research. And this is important even if you don't hold these identities because this is the fastest growing population at least in the United States. I keep
Mm-hmm.
telling folks the population of people who identify as mixed race has increased by 276%, 276% in 10 years.
Oh,
And part of it has to do with there are more mixed race people. Part of it has to do with we didn't have the mechanism, the way to collect the data for a long time because, at least in the US, people for a long, long, long time subscribed to the one drop rule, right? Which is this idea that if you even had a little bit of blackness in you, meaning African ancestry, then all of you was considered black up to 132nd uh, ancestry in some states. And then what I have learned in my research, and not just my research, like just being a person, is there's not one way to be mixed person. Listeners who have been around for a while have heard me say this a lot of times, but I'll share it on this episode as well. I'm often assumed to be biracial, like as if
yeah.
I have one parent that's black and one who's white. And that is not
Mm-hmm.
true for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a person whose mixed ancestry came generations before me. So when I came upon your books, y'all don't see me, but I'm like, this is amazing. When I came upon your books, the first one I found was the multi-generationally mixed Black identity. And then I saw you had the other one, the multi-generationally mixed white identity.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, she's given me language for explaining because it's always this long, detailed explanation to explain why I look like I look if I'm not biracial. Well, one part of my family is black, but even that part of my family has a lot of mixes back in the day or whatever. And then the other part of my family is Creole, but I didn't grow up Creole, but
Yeah.
Creole itself it's like this whole convoluted thing. But now I have the language to say, no, I'm not biracial, I'm multi-generationally mixed.
Oh,
And sometimes people need a little bit more information. So I say, what that means is I have mixed ancestry.
yeah.
And so, you know, I come out looking a little bit more racially ambiguous than people who don't or who have less mixed ancestry.
Yeah.
So this was gold for me personally
Thank
because
you.
it gave me language to describe my own situation. But it's platinum for me as a writer and a researcher because now I get to share that with other people. I get to pass this along. So thank you for doing this
I'm
very,
so
very
happy.
important work. And
There's a guy, he has a channel that I like. Two guys. One channel is biracial awareness. I think that this channel is interesting. And another guy we spoke, and his name is Mulatto Vanguard, and he's biracial American. He has a black American father, white American mom, and he's actually fighting for the recognition of the biracial group. So I totally understand him. But what is difficult from what I've encountered and understood is encouraging the MGM people, multi-generationally mixed black people, to recognize themselves as mixed because unlike the biracials, we are what we are because of the slave trade. I have my best friend, for example, one of my best friends. She's from the French Caribbean, from the island of Martinique. She had a DNA test. She's literally 50% European, 50% black, African. And she told me, Victoria, there's no way for me to recognize myself as mixed because I know from where that mixed heritage came from. So
Mm.
that's the reason why it's going to be much more difficult for the MGM people to recognize that
Hmm.
they are a part of the mixed group because whether they're white or black, we are the product of the slave trade. I have a tie to the Black American community because my dad is partially West African. His mom was from Ghana. So I descend from the Black Americans and the Caribbeans who came back to West Africa a century ago. And they were from the South. But on my mother's side, um, we were the victims of the Arab slave trade and the Indian Ocean slave trade, which makes me an MGM person. I have European ancestry, but we mostly mix with the Afro and the Asians from, the east coast of Africa. And you also have Creole societies over there, Mauritius and whatever.
Hmm.
So it's the same technique, the same pattern. And a lot of us, we have a hard time recognizing that we are mixed because of slave trade. My own siblings, for example, me, I look the way I look. Some they look darker, and they have a hard time recognizing the non-black blood that they have because they know where that came from. And my mom also, she's exactly like me physically, and she struggles at times, and it's difficult for the MGM community to admit that we are mixed because of that past. And that I think that that's the element that makes us different from the biracials, because the biracials, I mean, they can be the product of fetishism, they can be the product of love, of respect, of two parents who love each other. So you never know. But we are tied to the, oh my God, like it's so deep, and that's why a lot of us we don't want to
Yeah.
recognize it, which is sad.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, and I do think that it's recognized a lot in the US that a lot of Black folks here have mixed ancestry due to the traumas of the slave trade. However, I also think there's a cultural piece here. Culturally in the US, most Black Americans think of Black culture. And so a lot, not everybody, but a lot of Black Americans accept any degree of Blackness as Blackness, like as one of our own. And I think a lot of Black folks here do recognize the mixed ancestry from enslavement. But to me, the bigger barrier of identifying as mixed, and I have to be careful here because I have to speak from my own experience,
Yeah.
until very, very recently, being mixed race was synonymous with being biracial, whether that was Asian and white, Asian and black, black and white, or whatever it was, whatever,
True.
you know? But I think getting back to why it could be difficult for MGMs, that is, multi-generationally mixed folks, specifically Black multi-generationally mixed folks, I think why it could be very difficult is because of two things. One, it feels wrong to say I'm mixed if I'm not biracial.
Mm,
Someone like me who isn't biracial feels like if I say that I'm mixed, am I betraying my Blackness?
uh-huh.
Because I grew up identifying as a monoracially Black person,
True.
even though I have light skin, and a lot of times people assume I'm mixed, as in biracial. I feel like I've come a long way because I started this show really specifically thinking about racial ambiguity,
Mm-hmm.
knowing like I'm not going to call myself a mixed person. I just know I look ambiguous to people, to being able to say out loud without feeling terrible guilt or shame or that I'm not being truthful, to be able to say, yeah, I'm mixed, but I'm multi-generationally mixed.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
Yep.
Also, because if you have proximity to whiteness, there's privilege there. And I recognize that I have privilege as a light skinned person, right? But I'm also caught in this sort of loophole, right? Because I'm not white, but
Yep.
so I don't get white privilege, but I'm also know that I have light privilege.
That's also the fight that I
Yeah.
have, that I have to explain to people that, oh my God, like there's so many ways to be mixed. Being
Yeah.
mixed is not a color. It's not a color. It's it's genetics,
Right.
it's a culture. But it's true that what you said though, it's that most of us we grew up black socially. We grew up black. And that's the reason why there's this sense of betrayal, even for me. But I think that the dynamic is different when you are like me, like you come from the Afro Asian world, because you are Afro, but you also mix with other people from other parts of the world. When you descend from European and Afro lineages, it's like a population that dominated the blacks. So it's different. Um, and I feel that when I explain my racial background, people are more eager to accept what I'm talking about than if I descended from an Afro and European lineage. That is much more difficult for them to accept. Um, Especially if a mixed race group was to be created against the Afro and Euro lineage, that would cause a problem. But when you mix with African and indigenous or African and Asian, it tends to be perceived as less dangerous than when you are black and white. That's what
Yeah.
I felt.
Yeah, because historically, those who held white superiority beliefs, believing that whiteness was meant to be pure and the superior race, they almost didn't really say anything if two
Yeah.
people of color got married, as long as you didn't
Hmm.
mess around with their whiteness. Right. And I'll just add another layer of complexity here. How about this? My ancestors were both slave holders and the enslaved.
Oh my God.
So, when people are biracial, they might think, okay, the white part of my family did not own slaves, so I don't have any tie with that, and it was awful, but we didn't have slaves or whatever. I
Yeah.
found out that on the Creole side of my family, some of our people were free Creoles of color. So
Yeah.
they were considered people of color, but they were free. They held privilege, maybe not the same amount as white privilege, but they did. But some
They
of
did.
them
Yeah.
actually owned slaves.
True.
That messes
And
with your head.
that's
I mean,
that's
it
horrible.
messed with my head. I was like, oh my God. But I got to tell you something, that knowledge, even though it's difficult to reconcile and accept and try to wrap my head around that, I
Hmm.
think has positioned me to help when I am working with people who are white or people who have some sort of privilege to understand, look, as a practitioner, I'm not here to blame you for the
Uh-huh.
sins of our
True.
previous generations. I'm here to highlight and illustrate where we are now because of what happened and to
Hmm.
talk about how we can make sure that we are moving forward in a more equitable way. And that's not just with race, it can be with ability, it could be with gender, it can be with any number of different identities. Victoria, could you just tell a little bit of your story, like where you are now and how it is that you got to be there and why you even dove into this space of multi-generationally mixed folks?
Was 19. I'm 33. My life changed when I was 19 because there were family secrets that were discovered. And these secrets were known to the elders, and I discovered them, and they were tied to the slave trade. And I noticed many things when hanging out with my friends. Some of them were from the French Caribbean, we looked alike and whatever. And many thought that I was from Martinique or Guadeloupe, whatever. And I started to realize that because I was talking to my mom saying, "Oh, Mom, we mix too or whatever." And she was like, no, I'm not mixed. Like, because for her, being mixed meant having a black and white parent. So I was like, no, there must be a way, there must be something, another term, another understanding to classify people like us. So when I, got to read about the French Caribbeans, and I had my best friend, Sikh, I saw that she was also mixed. She came from two mixed parents, two mixed grandparents. I was like, okay, so this person here, my friend, my sister, she descends from a lineage of mixed people from generation and generations. And this is what we are. But on the other side, East Africa, Congo, in Asia, whatever, because of other things that happened. It's like in Trinidad over there. And I realized that, yes, that's what we are. And I was so happy because it was like, even though people thought I was crazy, I was happy because I managed to put a name on something that we were all along. And everybody was denying what we were, like we did not exist. No, we are something, but we don't know. So that was like a liberation for me. So I did that for the black and white people, like my friend Cindy. I'm going to do this for people like me, Afro Asians. Stay tuned. And I also did that for the white people from the Caribbean. There's a lot of white Cubans, even if you don't see it. They do have probably 20 to 30% of African ancestry, but they are white because they actually descend from mixed white people who intermarried over time. And so when you look at them, you think that they're white. They are white, but they also have African ancestry. They also have native ancestry. But the Euro is more important. So these people too, they are white versions of what we are because they also descend and come from a post-slavery society. So I told myself, no, it's not just us. It's also the white people, like some Melungeons as well, from people from the Appalachian.
And I'm so glad that you brought up this population because a lot of
Yeah,
people
the
don't know
Melungeons,
about this
because
group.
there's a guy I know. His name is Forrest. Very nice person, and he's an American. And the guy managed to trace back his African ancestry, and he actually descends from the Congolese who were deported to the Appalachians like centuries ago, and is a Melungeon. So he's white,
Mm,
Afro, and indigenous, but he's mostly Euro. And I'm like, okay, so this is a person
hmm
who's like us, but it's the other way around, and they deserve to be recognized too. So it's also a way for me to tell people that the mixed family is much more greater than we think. And it was important to make these books because we have the history. And saying that doesn't mean that we hate black people. No, not at all. I'm proud of my African ancestors, African ancestry. But at some point, because of history, because of what happened in our lineages, we also became something else. And I don't think that recognizing it makes us anti-black.
I think you said it beautifully, Victoria, because I grew up with kids in school constantly asking if I was mixed or biracial. I knew I wasn't biracial, but I'd go home and be like, well, mom, the kids always ask me if I'm mixed. Like, am I mixed? And she's like, no, you're black. But it had more to do with, again, I think that culture and that black pride of like who we are as a people, as Black Americans,
True.
than denying any of my ancestry. It was just like, no, you're black because you're one of us, because a little bit of black means you're all black.
Mm-hmm.
But my experiences were not the same. I walk through the world differently. They walk through the world differently. So it felt like, okay, I can say I'm black, but at the same time, I'm teased because I'm not black enough, or I don't fit in because I'm not white enough, or X fill in the blank enough.
Yeah.
So I know that I'm something different.
Mm.
I felt even less belonging because I couldn't even say I'm biracial. I feel like
Yeah.
it used to be like you are one of these, and I call them census buckets, right? You're either black, white, Asian, native, or like, like there's whatever the census buckets are.
Yeah.
You either fall into one of those or you're biracial, but you can't be something different. So if you're a little bit of this, we're just going to put you all the way in this bucket.
True.
And it was always so complex for me because I'm like, I know that I'm calling myself Black, but I also know that I don't have the same experiences and I don't belong with people who are biracial either.
Um, that when it comes to the conversations that I have with my best, and I told her, you know, Cindy, the difference between you and I is the fact that you descend from Europeans and you don't look like them. But me, because I also descend from Arabs, well, they were both black and white Arabs. That's who I descend from. But if I go to the Arabian Peninsula, I have roots in Yemen, for example. I'm gonna find millions of Yemenis who are gonna look like me. So it's different to have a colonizer who looks like you than having a colonizer that is
Mm.
totally different from you. And that's the reason why it's so difficult when I'm talking to East Africans, even Eastern Congolese people who are mixed with the Arabs. It's so difficult to make them understand that we are the product of a crime against humanity. Because when you go to the Arab world, first of all, black people are so ill treated over there, mistreated over there. But you also have a lot of people that look like us. So that's the reason why it's so much complex. When you are from the Afro and you're a
Wow.
lineage, it's easier because you don't look like a white person. You are mixed. You're not black, you're not white, you're mixed. But us, even if I go to North Africa, to all the black people, all the Afro North Africans, they are living in the South. So if I go to the south of Algeria, even in Morocco, I can pass for a Moroccan. But I mean, we look alike, but at the same time, we're not alike because one party colonized the other one. And that's the reason why talking about Arab colonialism is so difficult for us.
I have done surveys and interviews of lots of folks over the last 5 years as I continued this research. And one thing that I find very interesting is there's a lot of people from Latin America, whether they describe themselves as Hispanic, Latino, Latina, often check that they are mixed race. And I've asked the question, why mixed race? Part of it has to do with the confusion of trying to classify being Latin American or Hispanic as an ethnicity versus race because there's so many different cultures and things. And like you said at the beginning, it's not about being a color. And mixed isn't a
Right.
color, but then they kind of do it that way, right? They're like, okay, are you Hispanic? But are you white Hispanic? Are you black Hispanic? And you could be like none of those things. But
Mhm.
they still force that question. When I say they, I'm talking about those who
Yeah.
make these forms and things that we have to answer. And so sometimes folks are like, well, because I'm not this nor that, so I just say I'm mixed. Some folks say, yeah, well, because of colonization, I am indigenous, actually. My people are indigenous from Mexico or from Central America or something like that. But then we had colonizers. So it's some of like the Spanish blood is actually white, European blood
Yeah.
versus the indigenous folks, or there's the Afro Latin. So they're like, in some cases, it has to do with colonization, as you talk about. In some cases, it has to do with like, well, because you know what? You're trying to put a label on me and none of these labels work. So I pick the one that's the least of a barrier,
Hmm.
And it's so hard because I feel like so many of us talk about race in itself, even ethnicity, to be honest, which is in itself separate from culture, though people try to group it together. It's socially constructed, it's all made up. And so
Oh,
part
yeah.
of me wants to be like, just forget about it. Just forget about it. Y'all just made up these things anyway. But it's so ingrained in us in our data. Like, even I
Mhm.
have to ask when I'm interviewing people, how do you identify racially? Totally recognizing that it's a social construct, but how do you identify racially? Because that's a way to get that data and see whose experiences are like what. So what do you think about that? Like, should we scrap it all and just be like, forget races altogether anyway? Or is it important to continue with the acknowledgement, even if it means more complexity?
No, me personally, because I see things as a historian, but I'm also a human being. And as a historian, and because I am for slavery reparations, and I'm trying to work on it for our descendants, I believe that it's important to classify people not as to divide and put a category above the other one, but to recognize them specifically for what they are, depending on their race mixing, their heritage, and what. When we're talking about the Ron rule, it's not Black history; it's mixed race history. So if we need to evaluate the degree of destruction, mental destruction that was done to the Afro people, whether they were 100% Black or mixed race, we need to separate to analyze and understand what happened to each group. How were Afro-Indigenous people treated in the slave trade? How were quadroons, I'm sorry for the term, I know that in the US it's not very well welcome. So when I talk about classification, the French that I also talk to, they look at me like, oh, are you crazy? Because in France, it's all about assimilation and race mixing. So classifying people is like, oh my God, no, we don't do this. But they're still as racist. People are more honest over there where we come from, whether it's Northern European or Canada and the US. They're going to see a black person, they're going to call them black. They're going to see this, they're going to call a spade a spade. So I don't know what's wrong with classification as long as you don't put a category above the other one. And I do this because I want to go deeper into the understanding of the slave trade and the impact that it left on both full-blooded black people and mixed race people. We also need to realize our ancestors didn't have the same experience. Full-blooded black people, they had their own experience during the slave trade. A mixed white person, some of them, they used to pass. We never even took the time to understand the depth of psychological destruction of passing. We don't know what it felt like for a white mixed person who decided to leave their family behind to pass for white. And we need to analyze and understand that in depth. So the one drop rule, I'm sorry to say that it's not black history, it's mixed race history. And that's a fact. That's my take. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think there is a right or wrong. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that people who are mixed have their own experiences. It is
Oh,
unique,
true.
and it
Mm-hmm.
is this space that you fall in between. So I think that is very important to recognize that, which is why I research multiracial people, right? And their experiences, because it's like it is not the same. I keep
Oh,
talking
true.
about my perspective from the US. Can you tell me a little bit about the kind of conversations that are happening in Europe? You shared a little bit about how there's this idea of more about assimilation, yet it's what's spoken versus the actual practice. So I'm just curious what it's like in a different part of the world right now.
What I can say is the Southern Europeans, like the French, the Portuguese, and the Spaniards, they are the original Latinos. They are the Latin people. And they call Latin America because that was a part of the world that was colonized by the Latins, so the Southern Europeans. And their approach to colonialism, wherever they went, whether they went to Angola, to West Africa, to the French Caribbean, was we are going to colonize you, but we're going to use the tool of assimilation and race mixing to dissimulate our real purpose, which is dominate you. That's the reason why it's so taboo and you cannot talk about race like that. Not even say the word race in France. People are gonna look at you like this. You can't. When you're with the Northern
Wow.
European, no, you can't. When you're with the Northern Europeans, like the Brits or the German, the Dutch, the Belgians, these people believed in apartheid. They believed in separation. So they're gonna call you black. They're gonna call you white. They're gonna separate. They're gonna. So that's the reason why. Because my family were colonized by the Belgians right after the Arabs. Well, we said black, we said white. And when you're in France, especially when I'm talking with my friends, they're like looking at me like, you said black, t'as dit blanc, t'as dit noir,
Like it's a
you
bad
said
word.
black, you said white. Yes. But
Ugh.
this is just another form of hypocrisy because Racism is still here. French institutions are extremely racist, but they're gonna disguise that under the idea of we are mixed people. We have, people from the French Caribbeans, they're people of color, they come from so many backgrounds. But look at the way they've been treating them. They are poorly treated by the French authorities. All of them. Even the French territories that you can find in the Indian Ocean. You have an island, the island of La Réunion. People are so mistreated there, but they don't want to talk about race because it's the promotion of race mixing. So, but that's the thing that I appreciate with the French, though. If they make a difference between a black person and a mixed person. There's no such thing as the
Oh,
one drop rule. It's it's just the younger generation that is more into pro blackness, that is trying to imitate the black Americans. They're trying to import the concept of the one drop rule over here. But a white French person will always make a distinction between a black individual and a mixed race one. And even so, even if they are racist. So a mixed race person can say that they are mixed in France. They will never be attacked for that or called anti-black because that's what they are. So that's different.
yeah. If you could share one thing, like if a reader only had the time to get one major concept from your writing, what would that be? What would you want readers to take away?
I just want the reader to feel free to be what they are. That's all I want. I write my books because I want people to feel free. And I know that it probably sounds a little bit contradictory because I was talking about categorizing people, but it's just categorizing people to give them the freedom back to identify as the way they want. And I really want the readers of my books to feel like, oh my God, this is me. That's it. That's all. Free because nobody has the right to force you to identify as such and such and such and such. You are what you are. That's it. That's my motivation to encourage people to be. That's what I want.
I love it. And I also find it a bit of a conundrum because, Victoria, in my book, I talk about I talk about racial categorization and how that was the creation of race. Like race wasn't always a thing, right? So I give the history of the creation of races from anthropologists from the past.
Mm-hmm.
But I then turn around and say, but here are the 5 ways that I've categorized people who are mixed. And I was like, wait, know that I'm not trying to put anybody in a box
Yeah.
because it's not about putting in a box, but
Mm-mm.
I'm trying to provide language to
Right.
say, here are some ways that we could describe our identities. And these are only the ones that I've come up with from
Mm-hmm.
my surveys and interviews. That's not to say that there aren't other ways that people identify,
Mm-hmm.
but I just think it is sort of this catch, right? Because you're like, on one hand, I don't want to try to put people in a box. I'm not saying if this sounds like you have to describe yourself this way, right? I'm not trying to say that. You said you want people to feel free. I want people to feel seen. Because I feel
Mm.
like when we don't have language, when we don't have words to describe our identities and how we show up, there's almost this element of invisibility. Like, if you don't have
Mm-hmm.
words for me, then maybe you don't see me. But
Mm.
if I can say, look, I get it. I know you out there that you don't necessarily have parents of two different races. Or I know
Mm-hmm.
you over there who feels like you're mixed, but you never talk about this part of your family because you didn't grow up with family members that identified that way. Or I see you over there where you're like, yeah, I'm black and I'm white and I'm proud of that. And I don't want to be called black or white. I just want to be called mixed. Or I even see you over there who doesn't want to be called anything. You're just like, I'm a person. Please stop labeling. All of these
Mm-hmm.
are correct. I asked you that question about categorization because it's a thing that I struggle with. On one
Mm.
hand, I want to tell the story. Here's a story of the people that I have interviewed and that I have spoken with and how they identify. And it breaks down into these 5 areas. But you have the freedom to decide how you identify. And
True.
here's some words that you might not have had before because I want you to know I see you.
That's nice. That's very
Yeah.
important. That's the key. I've seen so many people, they're unable to identify themselves. They're going to say, yeah, I'm black. But no, you're not, because you descend from such and such people too. So you mixed. Yeah, but why is my skin so dark? You can be mixed and dark skin. Yes, it's possible. It's not far fetched, you know? And we still have
Yeah.
so many people, and also in the French, there are women, your color, your complexion. People over there, they call them Shawna, which is a very derogatory word for a light skinned person. So when you ask them, are you
Mm.
mixed? And they tell you, no, I'm black, do not insist. Because they know that the white ancestry that they have, it was through abuse. So, it's a lot of people, they're still struggling with the European ancestry that they have, the non-black ancestry that we have. But like my friend Cindy said from Martinique, she said, eventually, Victoria, we are a new people. And that's what we are. We are a new people. Slavery created new peoples, new nations. And this is a fact. No, yeah, because the blackness
Mhm.
of the Black American is made of so many different African groups. Some they descend from Senegalese and Ghanaians and Congolese and this and that. So even their Africanness, their blackness, it's mixed. So leave
Yeah.
people alone. Let them be what they are. We are a new people.
Oh,
The question that I'm asking is, do you think that one day, because I know the African Americans, I respect them a lot. I respect them a lot. I have a lot of respect for them. But do you think that one day, the MGMs who belongs to Black American community could ask to be recognized as a separate group? Being, I don't know,
mm.
you know, if they wake up one day
Yeah.
and say we
No, it's
want
a
to be
good
seen as
question.
mixed, because I think that the starting point is if the biracials manage to be recognized, and I think that's going to happen in the future. If they manage to be recognized and to gain more power, maybe more MGM people who were classified as black, maybe they could also wake up one day and say, we want to be recognized as something else. But would that cause division within the black group there? People are complaining about colorism, calling light skinned people derogatory words and dark skinned people derogatory words. So the division is already there. People know that they are different.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I cannot speak on behalf of the Black community because everyone's going to have their own
Okay.
thoughts on that. But I can say this. I think to a degree, this has already begun, but mostly when it comes to official paperwork and things. So our census is every 10 years on the aught years. So every year that ends in a zero, basically, right? So in the year
Mm-hmm.
2000, it was the first time that you could write in your race rather than only selecting a box. And keep in mind, historically, like e- generations and generations ago, a census taker would decide for you. You didn't even get asked. They would just look at you and decide what it was, right? So in the year 2000, finally, people were able to write in the way that they identify. In the year 2010, they could select more than one and write in. So there's more freedoms, and I think people are beginning to do that, especially with the advent of the DNA testing. I think
Mm-hmm.
people are like, oh, well, I am multiracial, I am mixed. And so they're doing that. Now, I don't know how much it's happening socially. So I think on official forms and stuff, we see that more than in social contexts when people are just meeting someone and they describe themselves. Because of the work that I do, it's so salient to me that it's very natural for me to do that. However, I don't always have these conversations with family members
Mm.
because Blackness is so rooted in who we are as a family, as a people. Even though
Mhm.
we know we have mixed ancestry,
Mhm.
I have had like my great aunts and uncles who almost look white would still describe themselves as Black people, period,
Mhm.
even if they have blonde hair and green eyes.
Mhm.
And so I think we have just been taught culturally to default to our Blackness. But I
Uh-huh.
do believe it's beginning, at least on an official way, as people start to embrace like what they've learned from their DNA tests or even some oral narratives that they've been given,
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
passed down. Now, the other question, now please correct me if I heard you wrong, because I think that you also talked about this in the context of power, like embracing your mixedness because of
Yeah.
power. Now, we already have evidence of other groups, European groups, that became white. Like Irish were not considered white, Italians were not white. We even have evidence of a Japanese man who said, I should be considered white. And he gave his
Mhm.
argument for this, right? He was not considered white, by the way. That didn't happen. But the idea of somebody having to apply and give an argument for a race to be classified a certain way is so bonkers to me because it speaks to the power that's held. Victoria, I mean, this has been no surprise. I knew it'd be a rich and wonderful conversation. I, again, just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts with us and your expertise. And I can't wait to hear about this third book. I think you've really
Yeah.
gifted this community with
Thank
your
you.
knowledge. And I'm here to tell you your work is needed and appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shona. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. That's the only thing I can say. Thank you for the time that you're giving. Thank you for reading my book. It's the best feeling in the world. I'm so grateful. I'm so happy.
Me too. I really appreciate this. Where can people find you and keep up with your work?
Well, I have my website and I publish my text over there. So if people want to read my text and I
Okay.
write a little bit about politics, a little bit about race, and I have also another platform where I write about mixed race studies. But my website is where I publish the most.
Okay. Fantastic. I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes so people can follow you and keep up with the wonderful things that you're doing.
Thank
I,
you.
I wish you the best as you get ready to embark on this next adventure of writing. And again, I just really thank you for sharing with us today.
Merci à vous. Thank you.